Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the Delivery Mates webinar, where we're going to talk about sustainability and how cargo bikes have a part to play. So we've got a number of people here today, which I'll introduce quite shortly. So my role in this, I'm the CEO of Delivery Mates, and I'll be trying to facilitate this discussion this afternoon. I suppose most people are asking, why are we talking about cargo bikes and why is it so important? So let me try and explain to you in terms of why it's important to Delivery Mates. We made some pledges in terms of being carbon neutral by 2024, and clearly cargo bikes is a very, very key part of it. So we want to talk about scalability and the ability to be able to get the technology up to speed in a quick way, to be able to finance it, and to be able to risk manage these as we grow that business and as other people do. So some panel members to introduce themselves first. So I suppose over to you, Nigel.
Nigel Gordon-Stewart. I'm Executive Chairman of EVE, Electric Assisted Vehicles. We're a company manufacturing, we sort of refer to it as micromobility rather than purely e-cargo bikes, although they are e-cargo bikes, because we believe that micromobility is more of a larger subject that encompasses everything from mid-mile to last mile, and even sort of outer urban distribution centres. So my background is exclusively in the automotive industry, where I've worked for about 30 odd years with various different companies like Lotus and Lamborghini and McLaren. So low volume manufacturing, but very interesting and very tech.
Come to you later then. Richard.
Hi, my name is Richard Brosser. I'm the CFO at EVE. I will leave sort of the introduction to EVE has been done ably by my colleague here, Mr. Gordon-Stewart. My background primarily is sort of corporate finance, investment, and sort of operational finance, commercial. So in terms of my previous industry experience, automotive, so Lotus Cars and McLaren, brief stint there, and then oil and gas and music. So sort of quite a mixture. So very much enticed towards the sustainable projects now, my philanthropic head on me. So but primarily I'm here to talk about the financing for cargo bikes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Right, Lawrence.
I'm Lawrence, I'm Lattice VP of Insurance, and our ambition is to build the world's leading green mobility insurer. Currently that means we do a lot of work with e-bikes and e-cargo bikes and other light electric vehicles. We think insurance is unfair. We say that because insurers that you pay to provide the service of settling claims make more money the less of that service they provide. So the fewer claims they pay, the more money they make. So what we've done is establish a new insurance business model where we, as the insurer, only make money when we settle claims. We do that by settling claims first and asking our customers to pay us back for those claims later and add a percentage fee on top for doing so.
Look forward to that discussion in a little while. Steve?
My name's Steve Dennis. I'm the Managing Director of Lease Stuff. We've been involved in the new delivery market since about 2012. We have bespoke funding, we have specialist funders who will fund electric bicycles and scooters. Obviously electric bicycles have been a challenge in the past because they don't have registration numbers, but we've overcome that now, so we're heavily involved in the cargo bike market. We also include full packages where riders can be supplied with all their equipment, their servicing, everything else can be included in a one-off monthly payment. And we now have the two-wheeled electric bicycles and scooters on the government scheme, which means that the likes of councils and people like that get discounted rates, government organisations. So, and for the first time we now have government organisations running two-wheeled machines, perhaps in the first time in 30 years. But there's quite a few councils taking them on now. For things like, unfortunately, parking wardens and things like that. So, we do some NHS as well. So,
excellent.
We cover the whole field.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Just in terms of first topic, I think we really want to talk about technology to start with. For those who don't know what a cargo bike is, it's probably on the poster behind in terms of there, but EAV have got some really interesting technology. It's a developing market, I think is a word I tend to use, and as we discussed today, but Nigel's probably best to start it off. So I suppose, really, Nigel, if we can just start off in terms of talk about the blockages in terms of getting cargo bikes out to a sustainable level?
I think the first question you have to ask is what is the purpose of e-cargo bikes, and what is the purpose of micromobility? And we looked at it because of the fact that we could see trends were moving very strongly towards ultra low emission zones or zero emission zones in certain places, and actually over the last few weeks a number of cities have also announced zero emission zones in key areas. And beyond that, because of the fact that you're looking at tailpipe emissions as being probably one of the key issues, although people talk about brake particulates and tyre particulates and what have you. But the fact of the matter is that like for like is not a sensible strategy moving forward. If you basically replace something that weighs 2 tonnes with something that weighs 2.5 tonnes with zero tailpipe emissions, you're achieving not a huge amount with probably what I regard and what we regard, I suppose, at EVE as being the principal pollutant, which is congestion. And the volume of people within our towns and cities, the rise of population numbers is ever increasing. If everybody wants to own a car, or whether it's electric or otherwise, it's just going to be a massive block. So we looked at micromobility as a highly efficient solution to reducing congestion with no loss of efficiency. And I think that probably delivery mates can actually talk to that and actually talk about the fact that if you compare a van to an e-cargo bike, there's probably no loss of efficiency whatsoever. If not an increase in efficiency.
Yeah, I think we've done 2 major pilots as well as day-to-day business, and I think we're on a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
We can take a cargo bike and take a van off the road.
Which, if you think about it, means you're taking 2.5 tonnes or whatever off the road of resource and replacing it with something that's lighter. Now, this is the key thing as far as we're concerned at EVE, and that is we've coined the term light tech. Because we believe that lightweight, and this goes back to our good friend Colin Chapman, who was the founder of Lotus, and there's 2 of us on this side of the table that used to work for Lotus. So our attitude is performance through lightweight. If you take lightweight or take weight out of something, you reduce the mass, you reduce the amount of energy needed to move it. And obviously what we're talking about here is primarily the ability to conserve energy, to use less resources, which I think is really the strategy we've all been looking for in terms of environmentalism. That has to be the way we need to go. And if that's the case, then we have to be a little bit careful on the technology side of things, because technology often means weight. And if you start to add more and more tech to things, equally if you start to add more and more regulation, you start to add more and more weight, which is the reason why a lot of vehicles out there now weigh more than they probably should do. In fact, definitely more than they should do. And the knock-on of that, of course, is damage to infrastructure, etc. Because roads, you can see ruts in roads where vehicles are being up and down them, and if you start to electrify things, that electric vehicles are pound for pound heavier than internal combustion engines. So really focusing on primarily reduction in weight, reduction in use of energy, and to come up with a vehicle which has a balance in terms of technology and simplicity. You don't want to make something overly technical, as I say, because of the potential weight addition, and equally because of the additional issues in terms of maintenance and all the other aspects of operating any kind of fleet. So in terms of blockages, the regulations are relatively straightforward. There are a number of pedelecs. They're basically, these vehicles are fitted with pedals. They are almost, to intents and purposes, pretty redundant. It's a bit like, I always describe it to potential customers as going into a gym and sitting on an exercise bike and setting it at 0, and then just sort of sitting there pedaling, having a natter to your mate. That's pretty much the amount of effort that's needed, unless you've got a very enthusiastic individual. But they're limited on speed, so effectively you get to 15 miles an hour, and the assistance cuts out. So essentially, what you've got is a vehicle that's fitted with pedals that operates as efficiently as a van.
Great. So if you took the journey you've been on, using that terminology that we all like,
we like a journey.
So we all like a journey. So in fact, where are you on that technology journey, do you think? How far along the road?
We look at micromobility as a complete solution. So we take in everything from last mile to mid-mile, as I say, operating from outside a city. And we think there's an ecosystem to be established there, which provides a complete, start to finish, using a micromobility solution. In terms of our journey, we're relatively, if I'm being brutally honest, we're relatively early doors on it, because this is an area that hasn't been excessively technically researched. I think going back a few years, micromobility or e-cargo bikes were relatively simplistic things. We're talking about sort of trikes, primarily made from bicycle parts. We're now moving forward into much more sophisticated componentry. We're using components coming from the automotive industry because of the fact they're tried and tested and heavily proven. So we're adapting those and using those within our bikes. And we're also developing our own technology as well. You can go overboard with that if you want to. You can kind of slightly, as I say, throw too much technology at something. But actually, there's a beautiful simplicity about e-cargo. And again, it goes back to lightweight again. And simplicity has to be the right way of doing things, because again, in terms of maintenance, in terms of insurance, in terms of finance, all these things are contributed to by having something that's relatively simplistic but robust.
The one that somebody was asking me about the other day, and I couldn't answer him, so I hope you could answer this, is...
You might hear silence after this.
The difference between 3-wheel and 4-wheel. So,
I was about to say.
Well done. Thank
That's
you.
my input for that question.
But
There's a curveball.
what you guys obviously have a 4-wheel product.
We do.
Yeah. And therefore, the idea is you get more stability and pieces like that. Can you just talk us through why you went down the 4-wheel route rather than the 3-wheel route?
The origins of the company go back to conversations that we had with DPD. Sorry to use that particular word.
Okay.
Or 3 letters. Where we were talking about specification, and actually one of the things that was very useful was that particular company had conducted some fairly significant market research and also some technology research as to what was most effective, and without a shadow of a doubt, a 4-wheel solution was much more stable. And the other thing is that we're finding interesting is that we started off with a vehicle that could basically carry around about 120 kgs of weight. Which was at the time what was looked for, and then we were up to 150 kgs, and now we know that there are several companies out there that are quoting considerably higher. And obviously, as far as a service provider is concerned, to a certain extent, probably the more weight you can put in one of these vehicles, the better, because that gives you an increased number of drops that you can do. I think that when we started out, the idea of having something that was a 4-wheel solution was in terms of balance. Somebody showed me once the Jeremy Clarkson sort of his thing in the Reliant Robin, where he was just had an entire show about how a Reliant Robin fell over. Okay, 1 wheel at the front, 2 at the back. Inherent instability in that vehicle, we know that, and there are a number of trikes out there that are 2 wheels in front and 1 wheel at the back, which is increased, especially if you put weight in the front with a cargo box. You can have increased stability there. But we just looked at all the various different solutions, and to be honest with you, the 4-wheel solution seemed the best. Now, there are a number of countries throughout Europe that have restrictions, and because the regulations were written some time ago, there are certain countries that have regulations which allow 3-wheel but not 4-wheel, especially operating in things like bicycle lanes, etc. And one of the things that we're trying to do, which is another point to get onto later, is the legislation side of things, making legislation much more e-cargo bike friendly within towns and cities, kind of dealing with these old out-of-date regulations that are knocking around, so that these vehicles, our vehicles, everybody else's vehicles, obviously operating in the cargo sector, are able to operate as effectively as possible and without restriction.
So in terms of the engineering of the power in a bike,
Yep.
What makes it a bike? And this is about legislation.
Pedals.
And the pedals don't do anything though.
Well, they do. They are required to move to activate the motor. Okay. So you can't bypass it and just use a thumb throttle. And there are some fairly strict regulations in that respect. The question is, what will happen to these regulations as we move forward? If e-cargo bikes are more and more accepted, and more areas are pedestrianised or restricted for cars and vans, to a certain extent the redundancy of those pedals is going to become more and more to the forefront. But equally, there's bound to be a trade-off, because if you're taking cars and vans off the road, then there are those people out there who would like to legislate, and they will come in with a whole bunch of ideas that will probably end up with airbags and ABS and heaven knows what else. And again, we get into that situation where technology starts to add weight to the vehicle. So it is really trying to find a way of being disruptive, but at the same time not so disruptive that you actually upset the status quo. It's kind of a gradual process which involves quite a significant amount of cultural change as well. But we find the four-wheel solution is most effective for us, and we've managed to turn a few over, not of ours but of other people's in terms of testing, just to see what happens. And we also did an elk test. I don't know if you've seen it, but we did the classic moose elk test where you swerve to avoid something at 15 miles an hour. And we remained absolutely dead flat without any problem.
Great. Okay.
But can I just say, if you go back to the 70s, right, when mopeds originally were out, they had pedals. Then they brought sports mopeds out that had pedals but got in the way. So what they then started doing was making the pedals so they lined up like footrests. And in the end, they took the pedals off mopeds. They said you don't have to have them.
They did. I actually remember.
So I assume that as technology improves, then the government regulations will use the same format and will catch up.
I don't know if it's technology evolving, Steve. I think it's more a case of mass adoption, and this is the key thing. This is something that we're trying to work on really strongly at Eve, and that is that we're trying to normalise e-cargo bikes. We don't want them to be a novelty. We don't want people to see them and go, oh, look at that, that's kind of cute, rumbling around, that's good. We want people to go, literally to almost not notice them because they are so normal. So we are blitzing media at the moment to try and get people really, really used to the fact that these things are just actually probably the best solution that we can come up with.
Your bikes do turn heads. I get out at London Bridge and you've got a few customers around there, brightly branded, and you see people double take. I personally, if we work with a number of your customers, it gives me a buzz to see them out in the streets, and they turn my head for sort of different reasons.
We do get all kinds of people that people that you've known sort of 10 years ago that you haven't spoken to for a while suddenly pick up the phone to you and say, oh, I've just seen one of your vehicles going on, which is great. But again, to a certain extent, that's because it's a novelty. And the thing and the weird thing is that we did a television piece actually with Fully Charged a while ago. And they came to the factory and they looked around and they tried the bike and they said lots and lots of really good things about it. And right at the end, the very, very last sign-off from the journalist who actually covered it, she turned around and she said, we think this is a really interesting experiment. And I absolutely went mad because of the fact this is not an experiment. If it's looked at as a novelty, then we're not achieving what we need to achieve. This is a remarkably efficient, highly effective process with companies like Delivery Mates, who are showing how efficient it is, and at the same time achieving every single environmental goal you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, I think that's the narrative. But the last question I really want on technology, in my mind, and please join in, but is scale. One of the things that will change people's minds is when we see more cargo bikes on the road. Our deliveries are made by cargo bikes. What's that scale like in terms of production, capacity, etc.? In your mind, when does it become part of the norm, I suppose?
It's going to be difficult because, I mean, at full capacity, we can produce just over 1,000 bikes.
Yeah, so it's circa 100 a month. So what we're trying to achieve at the moment, we're working alongside an OEM. So our anticipated sort of scale up over the next 3 to 4 months is to ensure we can meet demand. Obviously, part of that is resource. Resource, as we know, there's a labour shortage. So something we've been working very hard on is, again, recruiting staff and getting talent in. It's not helped, as I said, by that labour shortage, by the likes of, I'll name them, INEOS, quoting they'll pay above market salaries. So what we have to achieve is one, marketing Eve as a sustainable, a global product, heightening people's awareness of that, educating the marketplace, bringing talent in. That talent gives us scale in terms of resource, and then equally parts. Essentially, most of our parts are coming from the cycling industry. We are going down very much the automotive route for parts as well, working with one of the OEMs. So the scale will come. The demand certainly is there. What we have to provide them with is a product which is fit for purpose, reliable, and equally we can achieve that level of supply from our site in Upper Hayford. The next part of that obviously is then mainland Europe and global domination for Eve alongside our competitors out there. So certainly demand outstrips supply. What we have to do is accelerate our own infrastructure to support it.
We also want to get central government to kind of recognise the fact that actually this is such a good solution, and the brutality of it's a vote winner. You know, especially within towns and cities, because of the fact that it as I say, it declutters, it reduces congestion, it reduces noise, it reduces all kind. I mean, it actually is such a good solution, really. And once we get greater adoption and greater recognition from central government, and as I say, if we just increase numbers, the novelty factor will start to wear off. To a certain extent, that's almost a paradox for you guys, because to a certain extent, your marketing lead on this is that you're an early adopter, a disruptor in the market, because you're using these particular products. And the more they become mainstream, the more, to a certain extent, you lose that marketing advantage. Sorry.
I think the other thing that's quite interesting is if you look at the German market, where even 3-4 years ago they were selling 60,000 plus
for sure.
cargo bicycles a year. So obviously they're a lot more common compared to they are in England. And if you look at the English or the British market, then obviously it does tend to sort of mirror Germany to a certain extent. Obviously the timing's different. So it does show the size of that market. You know, if you're looking at 60, 70, 80,000 a year, that is a substantial number. You've only got to look at the number of Dutch manufacturers and everything else that are in the market, and you can see that where it's going, you know. And I think,
but infrastructure over there, Steve, is so much better. I've just come back from a trip to Amsterdam and Brussels, and we were, sort of driving along roads and seeing these absolutely gorgeous cycling highways to the side of us, and being so jealous of the fact that actually we weren't on bikes riding along those, because they looked so much better than the roads we were on. And we don't have that here. We've just never worked on that infrastructure opportunity, and that's a real pity here in the UK.
I think it's also fair to say that with the OEMs out there, I mean, again, if we look at some of the larger ones, whether it's PSA, etc., they look at the commercial vehicles that they currently sell across mainland Europe and the UK, which are our prime territories at the moment. To actually replace those, it's a paradox, it's a threat to them. So what they have to, we hope, we have to educate the marketplace. That's going to be driven by our customers. Instead of buying an EV van, where it has its uses, in a city, what we'll see is that greater adoption of an EV cargo bike. So working with the OEMs doesn't help sometimes, because as I say, they see that threat, existential threat there, but at some point they will have to adopt this, because otherwise they're going to lose a sizable part of their marketplace.
Is that tide turned already, or turning?
Well, I think it's turning.
It's turning, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we're certainly seeing some appreciative gestures towards us from companies. We've had others approach, but what we've made sure, we've got a very strong strategic relationship, if we can say that, that's working well, and that's giving us the scale that we need as well. Going back to the earlier point about us actually making sure that we can actually supply the marketplace. But ultimately, it will depend upon an OEM entering this marketplace.
I mean, do you think, Richard, that the OEM market, a bit like in the motorcycle world, like Audi bought MV Agusta and various Mercedes bought, I can't remember who Mercedes bought, but they actually bought motorcycle manufacturers to reduce their carbon footprint so they could lower their business. So do you think there'll come a time when the mainstream car manufacturers, etc., will then, having looked at motorcycles, will move on from that and now start looking at the electric producers and want to buy into the market to again reduce their global footprint? Because there's already an issue this year. We supply quite a lot of vans, and there's an issue that Mercedes have breached their 2021 emissions targets. So it currently means Scooterize have got a vehicle that's been stranded because Mercedes can't register it because they've used their emissions target for 2021, and I assume the new one starts in April. So there is already these other factors going on behind the scenes that we're all really not privy to.
I guess I look at it from a cynic's perspective, being my age. I don't know if I'm old enough here. So the way I see this with the OEMs is they have a choice, either to adopt or not. They'll look to consolidate. I mean, for me, it's all about vertical integration in marketplaces. It's no different to your fuel companies out there, essentially moving on to EV charging points. There will be that adoption. If they don't embrace it, somebody else will. They have the infrastructure there. So as adoption becomes, or it's exploited across the UK, mainland Europe, the rest of the world, they're going to have manufacturing plants that essentially will be underutilised. I mean, yes, of course, more EVs will come out there, whether it's an EV or hydrogen or whatever is the next fuel vessel that's used. But where we see this is we will see OEMs adopt cargo vehicles in different variations, whether it's into like commercial vehicles as well. So for us, it's only going to get better.
I think, Kevin, we were talking earlier about, because we both work for OEMs, and their speed of change of direction, given their investments and amortization of engineering works that they've scheduled 10 years ago, is not exactly the most rapid thing in the world, unless they skunk works and come up with something that can actually deliver relatively quickly. So I think Stevie right. I think at some point they're going to start looking at this as an acquisition opportunity rather than, yes, to reduce their own carbon footprint, but also because of the fact that this is going to be stealing sales from them. There's no two ways about it. They're going to start, especially with all this increased pedestrianisation, they're going to lose the opportunity to use those vehicles. So people are going to look for alternatives. They're going to move across to e-cargo, mid-mile, whatever it happens to be, and then effectively that's losing sales. But it takes them ages. That's the problem with OEMs, is they just take such a long time to move.
So if you take the OEMs and vans, let's think about the scale thing, because 4.1 million vans registered March 2020. That's what we had in the UK.
Yeah.
Of that, we think there's around 1 million in the last mile logistics market.
Probably about right.
What percentage are we going to take off the road in the next 12 months?
4.1 million.
Great, good answer.
That's a really interesting question. We're going to take a relatively small amount, but I think it's going to be an exponential increase over a period of time. And as I say, as soon as it becomes less of a novelty and more of a proven fact, which companies like yourselves are actually going through the process of actually piloting and proving how effective it is, not just in logistics and e-cargo, but actually in terms of trades use or whatever it happens to be. We were talking about, actually no, it was an article that was published by Centrica the other day, or the head of British Gas, the fleet head of British Gas, who was talking about ideas of using e-cargo to bring engineers into locations to actually do service work, and then drop boxes with potential parts left around, but again based on an e-cargo type system. People are starting to think about it much more creatively now, which is really, really essential. So how much can we take? As much as we can. How much can we deliver? We can ramp up as much as we need to. I mean, seriously, we're in a position where if we need to significantly upscale, we can.
And that's probably around the marketplace generally across all manufacturers.
No idea.
Unfortunately, Michael's not with us today because he's got COVID and he's stranded over in the Netherlands. So unfortunately, we can't get that second view. But Michael, when I spoke to Michael, he was saying that their scalability is around funding, which we can talk about as well.
Do you think there'll be an opportunity where, in effect, you'll see an EAV equivalent to a Boris bike, where they have a slot-in charging station for private individuals? The only reason I mention it is an EAV obviously has a roof, so it's an all-round year usable thing, And we know from clients who have approached us for funding for various things, there are lots of the major utilities looking for vehicles because they can't park enough cars at their facilities, so they're looking for something else to get people in and out of work. And they're looking at things that can charge, obviously while they're at work, and then they go home on them. And obviously the fact it's got a roof makes a big difference.
We are absolutely convinced that what follows on from the proving ground that is commercial logistics is going to be personal mobility. That is absolutely going to be the next thing. We've already had lots and lots of inquiries from people saying, can I buy one of these and adapt it? Can I take my kids to school in it? All this kind of stuff. And at the moment we're saying, well, no, but just keep your powder dry a little bit longer, because without a shadow of a doubt, I mean, the stuff that you guys are doing is basically paving a way for a mass increase in micromobility, which I think is going to be really, really exciting. And then we get into some really interesting conversations about pedals and technology and all kinds of bits and pieces, because it's one thing having a commercial vehicle that you can jump in and jump out of without losing any time whatsoever, because you don't have doors and you don't have heaters and you don't have radios or McDonald's wrappers all over the dashboard or whatever it happens to be. But it's very different when you talk about personal mobility and people wanting to listen to Radio 2 in the morning, or that's show my age, or whatever it happens to be, while they're trundling their 3 miles to take Jocasta and Dennis to work in the morning, or whatever it is.
I think probably to reflect on your question, Stephen, what we're also seeing, and its discussions have been sort of taking place over the last, let's say, 12 months, and certainly some things I've been party to, where we're looking at the gig economy. So a vehicle can be used 24/7. We have one particular customer now in the logistics sector. And that's exactly what they're doing. If that bike isn't being used, it's downtime, underutilised. They can be operating 24/7. It does have its stresses on the bike, and essentially, we've created or designed that cycle to e-cargo bike to operate for extended lengths of time. But this is where I think another question comes down to the technical side of the product. We're looking then actually, and I'm going to use the word abuse of that product by the rider. And what we have to get across to that community is the way to actually look after that product. It's no different to driving a car and taking pride in that car, your van, essentially your work vehicle. So whilst it's a very robust product, what we have to do is train and educate the user. And then that vehicle can be used 24/7, through better motors, extended batteries, better products, better parts going onto it, or improved parts, I should say. I mean, we've seen through its life cycle over the last 18 months, we've gone from version 1 to version 2 and version 3 within the next 8 weeks, which is all based on customer surveys as well. So going back again, another point about the OEMs, our speed of change is far faster than OEM. So if we have a customer that says they want us to adapt the product, we can adapt the product, given time. And in some cases, yes, they'll even pay for that, which is also a good thing for us, especially for me being the finance director. So, what we are seeing is we'll work with our customers. So whether it's in the logistics sector, food, cakes, we could name any number of sectors that we're operating within with an Eve bike, we'll always listen to our customer. So we'll make it as versatile and give them to have to sweat that asset as much as possible. So.
Yeah, I think there's a challenge in the marketplace from a logistics point of view, and our customers is a multi-customer network. So if you take the sort of traditional network parcel carriers, they're traditionally multi-customer. If you took Amazon, for instance, they're a single customer because it's just Amazon at the moment. So when you come to that in a micro-mobility world, there are two plays, I think. One is, what happens when you want dedicated? And believe me when I tell you that it's like OEMs a little bit, where logistics networks won't want to co-locate. And that's about a thought process rather than an actual security or anything to do with that. There is a mindset in the same way the retailers and brands look after brands.
Yeah.
And therefore, so we're finding one is some customers are looking for dedicated. They want to get and be involved in the specification of vehicles, load capacities, etc., which really comes on to a very interesting question about funding, because as many logistics organisations wanted to do through commercial fleets, run them as much as possible.
If I may, Kevin, that probably brings nicely, segs in Lawrence here from LACA, in terms of then the risk associated with having a versatile product across multiple disciplines, multiple companies. How would that work for you?
We're kind of like following, let's say, the behaviour that evolves from the nature of the vehicles you develop. We kind of, maybe let's say we're not driving the change in behaviour, we're responding to it. So we want to know how our customers are using their vehicles in practice, if they're using them for multi-drops, doing food delivery, let's say on either a cargo bike or a normal bike. We design our products to meet the need of what they do in practice, not to push behaviours on them. So in terms of multi-use, we just want to know as much about what it is our customers are using them for and not dictate to them, but respond to them from coverage terms point of view, pricing point of view, and all the usual stuff.
So if you had a customer, for instance, let's just say with hotel delivery mates, essentially using a product, let's say it's on a 2-shift, it's on for 16 hours, and then the night shift it's being used as a food delivery service. As part of the old Deliveroos, we can name them Ubers, etc., Just Eats. So the insurance side of things, obviously from a risk perspective, you've got one company sat here with a degree of provenance, and then you've got your gig economy, you've got your individuals then essentially on your 0-hours contracts taking that vehicle over. It's something that we need to look at as far as a product and how we lease that product out there in some cases, and even then how do you then insure it?
So are you talking about you taking Eve as
Eve
still retain the ownership of the
Eve
bike?
is a common policy probably. We'd have to, we'd have a blanket policy being covered.
The way we think about risk in general is we don't look at like static, what I call static risk factors. So in the consumer market, it might be you live in the bad postcode, you're a bad risk, you get a bad price, or a price that reflects that we think you're a bad risk. What we think about more is actual like behavioural characteristics and how you're using the bike, how you're behaving as a risk. And so in the postcode example, you might say, okay, this person lives in the bad part of town, but their bike is their pride and joy, or they care for it and look after it in exactly the way that we would want to see them do so. And we, our price represents that rather than just the static risk factor. So if you're talking about multi-use, we have something we call our behavioural risk score that influences price based on, exactly as it says in the tin, behaviours. So if we know that there's multiple uses of the bike and we know what proportion of time, miles, whatever measure is appropriate, is being used for different, for each different use case, then we can consider that and fairly reflect the price. So not just to say, 50% of the usage is bad usage or high risk usage, and the other 50 is lower risk usage. In the old world, you might say, okay, this is a bad risk because it's being used for, in the city, multiple drop deliveries, whatever it may be. If we know how the bike's being used in practice, we can respond to it.
I mean, can I just cut in there? Because in terms of leasing and funding these bikes, obviously, just coming on to Lawrence Insurance, obviously is very important to us because obviously the client has to insure the bikes. But also that's important to us in this new industry is the quality of the bikes that are being made that we're funding. There are quite a few very small manufacturers, etc., that we might like to be able to fund their bikes, but they don't have the backup or they don't have the required low risk from a funding point of view. Because obviously the last thing we want, if we fund somebody's bicycle and he's using it to work and then after 9 months it goes off the road because he can't get any parts, eventually they come back to us and say, well, I'm not paying for a bike that I can't use. It ends up back on our door. So the quality of manufacturers and the quality of bikes that are being made does matter a lot. We've managed to get these bikes approved on up to a 5-year lease plan. Why 5 years? Because we don't do a residual. Instead of doing 4 years with a residual which has mileage restrictions, usage restrictions, condition restrictions, we basically have got it agreed that we can do the extra year. So basically whoever takes the bike on, it's their responsibility. Nobody's going to come to them like with a lease car and say you've scuffed a wheel or you've bent the handlebars or whatever, And then we arrange for the title to be transferred to them at the end, so they get the value. So not only do they get the use of it and the write down as a lease on a standard bookwork, i.e. off balance sheet, at the end of the period they also get the value in the bike because it's their bike. And we would hope that in a lot of cases it means companies would make sure they were looked after a little bit better, because obviously at the end of the period they can be used as a deposit on buying a new one. Because obviously the whole idea of this new technology, which we work quite closely with our manufacturers on, is if someone has a 5-year lease or a 4-year lease, then you need to be on the phone after 3 years getting them to upgrade to the new technology that's available, while that their bike can be taken in and resold at a reasonable value. Nothing less than Apple do with their iPhone. You trade your old one in, they give you a price, and you walk away with a new one. And we do the same, so we can settle our leases at any time. Even if there's a shortfall on settling a lease for condition or whatever reasons, all we then do is tap it onto the new lease. So it doesn't really cost anything. So someone can have the new technology, a far more suitable product, for a few pounds a month, and certainly in bicycle terms.
I think it's all this because we've jumped onto the other two. Sorry, we've just got a question.
Yeah, I've got a question about the value of second-hand cargo bikes.
There you go.
Yeah, what we're doing about it.
Okay.
But it's
Sorry,
really interesting because
just so that everybody got that question. So the question is how are we setting, I think, and understanding the residual value on cargo bikes and second-hand market?
Right, I'm going to do one bit of this, and then my learned colleague to my right here is going to leap in on it because it's one of his pet subjects. But the secondary market for e-cargo bikes is actually really, really important and really interesting. It goes back to how we started this entire webinar, which is talking about the technology side of things. The wonderful thing about taking a bike back in after it's been used for XYZ period of time, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it happens to be, is actually at this particular moment in time, it's a bit like Napoleon's broom. There are elements of it that can be replaced, relatively easy to then have a bike which is pretty much a brand new piece of kit. that can then be released out into a secondary market. And that's what we saw as being quite a key area in the gig economy side of things, because actually that then brought product into the market at a pretty solid price. It does depend on financing, and it's interesting, Steve, talking about the stuff that you were saying a few minutes ago. Again, going back to scalability, some of the issues that we've come across is finding willing partners to actually fund startups and other companies who are looking to do this and introduce e-cargo bikes. And there's enormous enthusiasm, there's enormous commitment from these companies, but finding people who are prepared to finance it isn't easy. So sometimes they're just not able to do it, and they go back to the tried and trusted and go and lease an electric van or whatever it happens to be, which effectively is counterproductive. But over a period of time, I think more finance companies are starting to look at this new sector, asset class.
Oh God, you beat me to it.
There you go.
So my favourite word and term.
So Nigel, you've handed that over really well, haven't you?
He loves this bit.
Thunder. So again, going back to the question itself, I mean, in terms of one, it's firstly adoption. It is a big education, whether we see it as replacement or incremental as far as the vehicle itself. Now, what Eve have identified, and it's no different to the commercial market that currently exists. I mean, circa 85% of all commercial vehicles operate into sort of financial product. So what Eve will be doing, and has set up a new company, Eve's a Service, aptly named, and we will be offering by April time a funded product. Now, we see this as sort of both a primary marketplace and a secondary marketplace. So as Steve ably mentioned, whether a company is taking on firstly a 2, 3, 4 year lease, we would then be able to bring that vehicle back in. We would hold the RV on that vehicle. We'd back it up. Then what we would do, essentially, is bring that vehicle back in. We have fair wear and tear. Again, no different to any other vehicle out there. We'd like them to look after them, refurbish them, and then resell them. Now, what it allows us to do is identify a secondary marketplace where people can't afford, and I do stress that, can't afford the RRP as it currently stands. It could be a small SME, it could be a flower shop, to be fairly obtuse, but that's what could happen. And they want a vehicle very much sustainable in a city. And the RV, we would hope after 3 years, again, given the construction of the vehicle, the chassis itself is very robust and longevity is there. I mean, again, the throwaway parts, your brakes, brake disc, etc., can be replaced very easily. We'd be looking to maybe maintain a 50% RV on that after 3 years. That's how strong we think it could be. Now, critical to this, and bringing back the key point of this, is about asset class. We are a new asset class. So where we are talking with funders, there is that, again, education and also risk. So we've had conversations ongoing now for the last 12 months with certain secondary banks, because the primaries don't want to know this area at the moment. And they love the product. They've got their ESG groups they've set up now, so environmental, social, governance. And it's all about the underwriting. So what we need to be in a position is where we don't have the computer says no. We actually have a thorough story behind the customer. Now, again, we will have tier 1 customers, we'll have tier 2, and we'll even have tier 3 customers. So what we have to present is a strong enough story, firstly if it's off our own book, and be able to convince, which is about and validate the customers. Of course, there'll be conditions attached to it, whether they're going to get a prime lending rate or a secondary one. We would look to promote that as fast and hard as we can, because it's in our interest to get the client approved. Again, risk aside just for a moment, we want to see adoption of this vehicle. And ultimately, there will be adoption. So Eve's a Service will be offering that product in April. We already have some products that have gone out on the secondary market. What we need to do is working with people like Steve at Lease Stuff and other funders, because we need a panel. And again, it's about risk exposure for everybody. And looking to get the client funded. As I say, it's what they want. It's off balance sheet for all the reasons we all understand around this table. And it's what they want. In terms of cash flow, it's much better for them.
So how difficult is the technology innovations going to impact on the residual value? So I see this a bit more when it's a sort of fledgling product. It's probably the wrong thing, but it's almost like the mobile phone technology. I see the old piece coming through. So how do you set residual values when your technology might overtake that residual value?
I think they're upgradable.
Yes.
That's the great thing about these vehicles is they can be upgraded and components can be improved or whatever without with a mobile phone you'd have to take a hammer to it, which is probably not the best thing to do. Whereas with this we can upgrade various different components as we move forward.
Again, other points, Nigel's quite right, to reinforce that, Where we've had customers, again with our version 1 and version 2 bikes that have been out there, and very much the bike has been proven out in the field, which is a double-edged sword. However, what it enables us to do is have the confidence with the customer. They know we will sometimes react, but equally we'll have preventative maintenance programs in place. So if we look at our batteries and our motors, they've been, again, improved over the last 24 months. Further improvements will take place, I'm sure, based on customers' requirements. Equally, going back to the point about the statistics around this, the metrics, we have to work with the customers to understand the needs of that bike, how it's being utilised. So again, one customer, as I mentioned earlier, is 24/7. Others may only operating at 8 hours a day, which very fundamentally affects the usage and also the perishability of the parts on that. So something we need to work with you, and we were having a session with Ercilio earlier. What we need to do is gather those metrics from you in order to better understand the total cost of ownership, the TCO. That's where we'll get to this point of having what we'd say is cap data, which everybody knows is the industry norm, for our product. And that way the education starts to take place, funders get more confidence in our product, we get better residual.
I mean, just coming in there, one of the things that Lease Stuff have done from a very early point of view is, particularly if you talk about the two-wheeled scooters with removable batteries, is we immediately have funded scooters plus extra batteries, plus extra technology to keep them going longer. It also avoiding because normally in motorcycle finance you buy the motorcycle and then you're limited to 10% of price with what extras you can buy with it. So whereas we've got rid of that altogether, so we can include the maintenance packages, we can include the batteries. So basically they just pay one monthly fee, and that includes everything for their 3 or 4 years or whatever. Obviously, again, this is where the reliability of manufacturer comes in, because like Delivery Mates or Scooterize we use, we have to know that if we're going to do that, these people are going to go out and service these bikes, because we're paying them, the customer has paid for it. They need to know they're going to get the quality. I mean, we can even include the insurance. So if someone came up with a 3-year insurance package, we can include it. We're a bit restricted at the moment because we've only ever been offered a 1-year insurance package. But there are legal ways of changing it, like with a lease car. They say if the road tax goes up, you'll pay the extra bit or whatever. So there are ways of changing it.
So Lawrence, talk to me about insurance.
Well, I was going to say, all of this to me, Eve as a service and financing that sits alongside it, and our role in that is all about what you talked about earlier, friction to adoption and mass adoption, right? And yeah, our role, I suppose, is providing security around that adoption, whether you're an Eve and you lease out bikes to customers, you want to know your assets protected, or if you're purchasing directly rather than leasing as a service. If you're the flower shop that's taking on a 15k cargo bike, that's a big purchase. You want to know it's well protected. And I think where we're winning, putting aside the lacquer model that I described in the sort of opening introduction, where we think insurance is unfair, we only make money when we settle claims. That's one part of why we're winning, but in this segment where we're winning is we're building products that really meet the segment's needs. You mentioned it's a fledgling segment from a lot of point of views, and that's certainly true in insurance. We see people putting square pegs in round holes, bringing motor insurance market products and knowledge and pricing and considerations, and try to apply that here, or bicycle insurers doing the same from the other end and try to apply the things that they do to bikes that are bikes by name, but not very much so in nature. Silly example, right? But if you took a traditional bicycle insurance product and applied it to an Eve, they wouldn't recognise that it has its own inbuilt immobilisation system, and that it weighs a significant amont. To steal one, it needs to be a premeditated, well thought out theft, and not the opportunist kind of theft that a bicycle might be exposed to. So yeah, I think everyone around this table is winning with a sort of specialist focus on this segment. So
we've got you two guys here on specialists in terms of funding and insurance, but probably Lawrence, for you, in terms of the insurance market generally, help us understand why it's difficult for that insurance market to come to the table on cargo bikes.
Well, let's say if you're a motor insurer, your business probably runs pretty well, right? You've got a model that works, it's proven, and does this segment move the dial for you yet? No, probably not. As you talked about, motor manufacturers looking more and more at this segment as a threat. Perhaps insurers will do that in time.
We think that we have an advantage having moved first, of course. Maybe it doesn't quite move the dial for the larger insurance companies yet, and maybe it's not quite worth the effort yet to build the specialist products that the people that are using these vehicles, let's call them, need. And again, that's to our advantage.
I think it's, again, to probably enforce that further, I mean, Eve as a company now, we have probably 3 or 4 iterations of Eve Cubed, Eve2 Cubed, the cargo bike. So we have the Eve Me that will be launched in due course. We have another cargo vehicle that's being developed. We have a refrigeration vehicle. So there'll be further iterations of this to allow us to open up new market segments. And there is a demand for it. We've already identified that. Again, on top of that, there's another mid-mile product that's being developed currently. Those prototypes will be launched towards Q2, Q3. The project's already underway. So I think from an insurance perspective, there's going to be new vehicles entering this marketplace which are over and above the traditional ICE vehicles out there, whether it be EV or otherwise, in fact, ICE and EV. So, companies like LACA are going to be very important to us, looking at, again, new assets, new vehicles, etc., because traditional motor insurers won't, at least not yet.
Our evolution, to some extent, follows the evolution of the use of the bicycles. And if you can put you can carry goods around it, it's a natural evolution for us is to insure those goods, of course. If legislation changes to recognise a new category of vehicle and it has a public liability insurance requirement, that's a natural evolution for us. But we don't just we're not reactive, we're proactive as well, and we're thinking about how we can support our customers in more traditional risk management fields. If you're operating a warehouse and you've got 10 EVs and batteries and goods, okay, now you're talking quite traditional insurance risk, and can we support them in thinking about how they charge their batteries, how they think about security, fire protection at that site, etc. So whilst we are somewhat reactive, we're proactive as well.
But from what I'm hearing, is the insurance market itself, the traditional insurance market, is nowhere near insuring this type of product.
I think the insurance market maybe is guilty of prescribing the way they think things should be done onto the people who are using these types of vehicles. And what our role is, I see our role when we talk about product development is not prescribing, it's listening and saying, okay, this is how the vehicles are being used, this is how their use is evolving, and building products that meet that need in practice up to a point. I think there always has to be a line, but it's no good prescribing policy terms that are just not practical to comply with. So our job is to listen and respond, I think.
It's interesting. It's an interesting concept. From when I normally go back to insurers, they go, it's almost about risk management. I suppose on a general, more, I suppose it's both for Peter and you, Richard, in terms of general risk, in terms of financing. So if you finance a vehicle, you want to know that risk management exists. What sort of things are you going to be looking at for an end user like Delivery Mates? What would you expect Delivery Mates to be doing?
Well, obviously Delivery Mates have grown with us, so we've been working with Delivery Mates for a lot of years now, and the Delivery Mates group of companies, and it's really showing that number one is that the higher profile, better quality clients we have who take these bikes, what it does two things. It drives the rates down, because obviously you're not going to get the same rate on leasing an electric bicycle that you would on a van, because they see the risk being, it's a new market, there is relatively few companies that will do it because it's not got a registration number, which is one of the biggest issues. And even some of the household names who claim they will, when you actually get down into it, they won't. You get all the way, you get your approval, you get all the way down to the end, then the asset committee gets it and they say, no, we're not going to do that asset. The reason is, in some cases, is most finance companies, the big well-known ones, Lombard and Close and all people like that, they're looking for a £750,000 book to even open it in that asset class. They're not. If somebody's looking at doing 20 this year and 40 next year and building it up, they're just not interested in the first place. So what we're lucky that we use a lot of very flexible funders. We even have some private funders behind it who are prepared to look at the new technology. And that's what we've spent the last 10 years doing, is getting this group of funders, enough funders to make that market drive forwards. Because also we have the issue, obviously it's a new market, so a lot of people, a lot of businesses are new in it. They don't have 10 years history because the market hasn't been here, you know. So we have to look at that, and we have to look how we can overcome what is required in a normal finance approval, i.e. you've got to have the accounts for the last 3 years, etc., etc., etc. Well, most companies, even Amazon delivery companies, haven't been around long enough to get that, because obviously the first year they don't do a lot and it builds up. So we have to look at other ways we can sell the company and sell the business to get the funding for it. And as the funding comes through and it's well paid and they see there's no risk and they haven't had a lot of clawbacks and all that, what happens is they get more comfortable, they'll lend to more people. Then the rates come down slightly. I mean, obviously we've seen a lot of confusion because of COVID has sort of messed things up, because they're a bit nervous about lending to anybody. But it's just a case of we have to sell the industry the whole time. It's not about what somebody's tick box, have they got this, have they got accounts, have they got last week's management. It's not about that. It's about selling the story and showing how the business, a bit like, you know, if someone does a crowd fund, because really you're selling the sizzle, aren't you? You're showing what the business can do going forwards, and people are investing money on that basis. And we have to give the funders confidence in the same in the same area. You know, the first time we went to a funder with a £13,000 cargo bike, which wasn't even electric, you know, they were horrified. They couldn't imagine that anybody would pay £13,000 for a bicycle, let alone £2,000 for it to be converted for the use that it was required for. So what we had to do is we had to sell it. We looked not only at the new company, we involved their suppliers and what their suppliers were prepared to do. So we built this whole package for them to allow it to go through. And we know now that that company's gone forwards. It's got you know, even from that little tiny start, it's now got multiple sites in different cities in the UK. So it's not so much about filling a finance form. We have to sell a story. You know, we have to sell a story, just like EAV sell a story for why they started making bikes. We have to sell a story to the fund managers to say, why should you lend money to these people?
If I may as well, and thank you, Steve.
That's right.
Very fair points there. I mean, Eve as a company, again, it's been going 3 years. October 18 we set up. So it sort of implemented the company, started the company up. Now, the first 12 months, essentially developing the product and going out with a couple of customers, proof of concept. Second year, very much, again, being a startup, raising funding, take us through to the next iteration, the next R&D phase. What we've seen over this last 12 months, certainly with my time there, is we opened up conversations with funders 12 months ago. And, you know, if I talk to my colleagues internally, you know, our head of partnerships, Leo Bethel, who you're aware of, you know, he's struggled with this whole funding exercise because he sees some of the funders out there, sees them getting funding for their normal run-of-the-mill vehicles. So let's just, it's a bit with delivery mates, etc. You know, you've got a stable of vehicles that you run. Yeah. You're introducing a new product into there. Yes, the esteemed word, the new asset class. I think a funder will recognise the client first and foremost. They have history with them. They can at least tick that in the box. Then they have to get past Eve as a company, its ability to be able to manufacture and sell a product. The sustainability of it, the cost of ownership, is it prepared to back up its RV? Okay, an HP agreement's slightly different, obviously, but from an operating lease, or lease finance product, we're willing to stand that ground. You know, we've got confidence in our product, obviously. We've invested, you know, multiple millions now over the last 3 years. So we're standing by that RV. It will change based on its use, but we can do that. 2, 3, 4 year models. For the insurance perspective, again, sort of numbers you would need. Now, from a funding perspective, we get past the Eve hurdle. The client, again, is either going to be a grade A, tier 1, tier 2, etc. We then have to be able to support that client. We want to see that adoption. So it is kind of gone down to the appetite of the funder. They will take this product on in time. Now, what we're willing to do in the interim period is we're willing to help fund our own vehicles. We're willing to take that risk ourselves. And yes, of course, we'll mitigate some of that risk. We can't go completely hell for leather and just throw vehicles out there and hope we will get paid. So what we then need to look at is, again, what size deposit we take down. again, mitigating risk even further, looking at the monthly payments that become affordable, and then looking at that back-end RV. So it's very much from an Eve perspective, it's an intelligent play. We will see other funders take this on, without a shadow of a doubt. And again, we're in discussion with people. Steve has been absolutely very supportive, very flexible with us thus far, and that's what we need. We need a panel out there to support this industry.
Yeah.
But it will take place.
I was going to say, slightly different perspective on a very similar problem, right? It's about understanding of this evolving new segment, and insurers take the same view, right? Without claims data, without a proven history, perhaps insurers find it challenging to take that sort of thing on. The lack of model lends itself really well to testing, maybe like underplays it, right? But we can launch products fast, highly flexible, adapt quickly, and so we don't necessarily need that sort of that huge bank of data to launch a product. We can launch a product, and given the way that we split claims across our customers, we're not so sensitive to setting the price correctly from day one, but we can launch a product, set the price where we think it should be, and evolve and learn over time, so we're able to move faster than others, which is perhaps why we're there and others aren't.
Also, we've also had the other useful thing on the asset class that we've managed to do. We've had one or two customers who just haven't managed to be able to get insurance at a sensible price. Well, most of our leasing packages, we actually have a default insurance. It's not the cheapest in the world. So if they don't come up with their own insurance, obviously, as a funder, we automatically insure the product anyway. So they have so long to provide us with their own insurance details. If they don't, we insure it regardless. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a coffee machine or a bicycle or whatever. So there is a default position, and we've had quite a few customers who have certainly used it in the short term to get going while they sort their own insurance out. While they get, because a lot of insurances spit things back saying, we don't have it. We had one insurer, and they had you couldn't have three-wheeled things. They could insure anything on their company policy, but nothing with three wheels. It was specifically excluded, and things like that. So when you're looking at electric cargo bikes, we've had that facility as well, which has really helped us, and talking these funders into doing these different things that are outside the norm, treating it like a coffee machine if it's not. Doesn't matter. Without that sort of flexibility and help, it would never get off the starting blocks. We'd never get more and more and more out there, which is what we need,
Yeah, I think the bit I'm coming from a slightly different angle, if I take from a delivery mate's point of view, from our commercial models, then we're actually, because we're wanting to play in a fledgling market, developing market, we've got a product, with all due respect, is probably overpriced to where it will be in 2 years' time. We've got an insurance market that's learning, and we've got a financing market that is nervous but is doable. All those things increase cost. So for an operator to operate these vehicles, the challenge is, how does an operator compete with an EV or a traditional van? Because we could operate those, because ultimately will a consumer pay more for this product? And the answer at the moment appears to be no. So if I take a sort of cargo bike delivery, will somebody want to pay more for that than a van delivery?
Well, it's going to be a lot cheaper doing an electric delivery. I mean, obviously the advantage of leasing is it breaks it down into a monthly cost.
Yeah.
So you can have quite a change in price before it makes any dramatic amount of change in the price of the leasing. But what you can also do with the leasing, which is what I said earlier, is that people, when they've done their first couple of years, they're then in a position where they can actually refinance what they've got, right, which reduces the cost because they'll have 2 years record, the finance rate will come down, or they can use that opportunity then to have it settled off at a cheaper rate. And let's say, for example, we've got an EAV that then goes to, because obviously they're our customers, so we're in touch with them anyway, and we say, oh look, Richard, we've got so-and-so wants to take his 2-year-old bike off and swap it for your brand new 3-year one, right? Because obviously we can get it at a cheaper rate. Obviously, if there's any change in price because of technology or the specifications increase, he can benefit on that. The actual cost to him is nothing. It's probably, if you're looking at, I mean, we do it quite a lot with scooters, where people change scooters, and you're talking about, 3 or 4 coffees a month cost difference. I mean, the beauty of leasing, it's all written off against tax, so there's no issue there. They get 100% of the VAT back. So in effect, if you add the value, let's say, for example, they take a 4-year lease and they've got, in effect, let's say, for example, Richard gave us a 50% residual value or a 35% residual value. If you actually added the lease up at the end, it would actually be 0% interest. In fact, it'd probably be a positive rate of interest because they've got everything off tax, plus the fact they've got the value in the article at the end. So that's why we have a lot of companies. They can transfer the title to who they want. So if you actually look at it, even though the paper rate is a little bit higher than, say, buying a standard product like a car or a lorry or whatever else, it's not costing anything because they have this ability to have the value in the goods at the end, which, of course, on a standard lease, although the rate is slightly cheaper for a car or a van, you don't get that value at the end. So you put that on. Actually having leasing through lease stuff, an electric vehicle, in real terms, is 0%. It costs nothing.
You said you were going to pay us to take them in.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it can be, because obviously if you've got a residual value that's higher than the financial cost, then it's a negative interest rate, isn't it?
So if I can add to that statement, Kevin, the situation we have here is that obviously if you try to compare us with a small, let's say a Ford Connect, what we've all got to understand and acknowledge that in terms of manufacturing discounts, they're a volume player. I mean, again, let's just say it's Amazon as the subject matter. They're ordering thousands of vehicles. Whether it's directly or indirectly, their volume discount is going to be huge. Now, obviously, given the current economic climate, we have this semiconductor issue. Lead times are out the window. I mean, I was quoted 18 months for a van because we still need to have a delivery vehicle ourselves to carry the Eve. We're given an 18-month lead time. Now, and the RRP now, pretty much they're standard. Discounts, you'd be lucky if you're getting a discount. So the Eve versus a small van, yes, they're either comparable or the van might be slightly more. So there is that conundrum or argument for debate with the customer in terms of pure commercial, financial, what's the difference between you're paying £12,500 plus VAT for an Eve 2 cubed, you're paying, let's say, 15 to 17,000 for a van. That residual, the discount, if they are getting a volume discount, is very much going to be impacted by the residual. They can afford to do that. With us, very much we're an early company. We have a cost of scale right now, a cost of economics. That is what it costs to produce a vehicle. The more volume, you'd expect economies of scale to come into play. And our strategy over this next 18 months, in fact 12 months, sorry, is to bring our bill of material down through better sourcing, volume. We'll be borrowing from another parts to an OEM. So we will see our cost of goods come down, full stop. We will be more efficient. Mm. In terms of the RRP, I mean, again, what I'd make very strong statements about in here is, why would we want to sabotage our own market? We believe we're competitive. Yes, of course, if a volume player comes in there and asks to order 1,000 vehicles or 500 vehicles, of course we would give that due consideration. We're not going to be uncommercial about something. But equally, why damage our marketplace? There's products out there for €20,000 right now, and equally a two-wheel product for as small as 3,000. We believe we're well priced in the marketplace. Again, then aligning that to, one, putting a fairly hefty deposit up front. We guarantee the RV. That leasing model, as Steve has so ably put, becomes far more affordable for a company. Then the company also has to weigh up its commercial, it's ESG, it's sustainability, it's environmental, it's carbon credits, whatever we want to call it. Essentially, they will weigh that up as well in terms of the economic cost. And let's all understand they are under that obligation now. They can't throw 1,000 diesel vans into London; they're not allowed. So they have to find an alternative. We believe we're a very credible alternative. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sat around this table now.
Well, I think that's really nice, because on this webinar we're all believers, but playing a bit of devil's advocate in the skeptics is that the skeptic, why be an early adopter? And unless we can find early adopters to this, then will we get off the ground?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is people will have a mix, won't they? They'll have a mix of vans, they'll have a mix of EAV type vehicles. So whereas it's always been vans originally, what they will do is they will start having a mix. But if you look at it, that's part of the reason also that we've managed to get, why we fought so hard to get this leasing extended to 5 years. Because what it does is it brings that monthly payment back. And because we know that someone can settle at any time, obviously it's not financially great to settle in the first year, although you can, it means that somebody can lower that payment to get their business started. If we're talking about the florist or anybody like that, they can get the payment to compete with a van. Obviously they're going to have far less running costs, you know. And then let's say, for example, they have it 4 years and they want the vehicle upgraded. We could even lease them going back to Richard and him upgrading it, and we'll lease the upgrade. So let's say, for example, it was going to cost $3,000 to upgrade their vehicle with a new motor and battery. I just use it as an example. Then all we do is we say, fine, okay, Mr. Customer, that's £60 a month or whatever. Send it into Richard. It comes out. All they're doing is paying for the last 18 months or whatever they've got it. He's paying £60 a month extra or £10 a month extra, whatever it works out at, and they've got the equivalent of a brand new vehicle. So what they can do is they can keep, the beauty of electric, you can keep recycling it. Not to use the pump, but it's keeping the costs down. So if you start looking at it over a 5, 8, 10 year period, the cost of having an EAV, for example, absolutely collapses against running a van by the time you add up all the insurances and MOTs and everything else a van needs. You know, because obviously if anybody's leased a van, they'll know that if you say you're doing 10,000 miles a year, that's fine. As soon as you're doing 30,000 miles a year, the whole thing becomes, you know, we've had customers charged £4,000-5,000 extra for the extra mileage because they've gone so much over and not realised the impact when they've gone to return it. And of course, with an EAV or our 5-year leasing packages, there is no mileage charge. There is no condition charge. So it doesn't matter if you crush it and fold it up and put it in the skip. You're not being charged extra, in effect, to say, oh, there's a scratch on that alloy wheel more than 25 millimetres long, so we've got to repaint that. You know, so you've got none of those costs. So I think it will become a mixture, and I think people will gradually realise that having perhaps to start with 3 vans and 1 EAV, then that's got to be a good way of doing it. And once they see the costs on the EAV, they'll probably work out they can get away with 2 EAVs. And they'll gradually come down, their percentage of fleet will come down and down.
Nigel mentioned at the beginning it made him skin creep when someone referred to the use of EV as an experiment, right? But I'm sure you've seen evolving attitudes to the use of these things in your customers' fleets. But is it the financial argument that's winning the fight nowadays?
Well, I think it's a mixture of. I mean, again, ultimately, a company's going to look at things commercially. If they look at their sustainability policies or ESG, I mean, forgive me, in terms of whatever they want to group it under, you know, they're going to weigh that up, and they are. You know, certainly there's a dependency on that. They can't ignore it. I mean, certainly smaller companies can. The large companies can't. They essentially get blacklisted half the time anyway. But if we look at the uses of that vehicle, there are some opportunities for us, and we've started working with one of the world's largest waste companies. They operate in the centre of town, in London, forgive me. They employ 350 people emptying bins. Now, they're not allowed to use vans within that sector. So what else do they use? They can hand carry them out, or they can use something that's purpose built for them. Our vehicle's adaptable. As I said, what we have done over the last 2 months is develop the vehicle for them. I mean, they're taking a box that we currently have on the E2 Cubed, but what they're also looking at is how we adapt that for their use. And it's a simple thing as carrying a broom, for goodness sakes. So we've adapted that product for them. It's simple, some clips and a shelf and what have you, but it's been done for them. They can now use that vehicle in a city without any issues in terms of when they can use it. There's no time restrictions through a cycle lane. So I think we'll see adoption through other arenas anyway, you know, that's not dependent on an ICE vehicle. We know we've got to compete with those. We can demonstrate a very good commercial case and economic case to take them on board. Equally, there's new sectors that will adopt this vehicle, and our competitors, whether it's a 2-wheel or a 4-wheel, or indeed a 3-wheel. So I don't think we're not being penalised now. We have to educate the market. You know, we're a new company, we're growing, we've got scale there. The demand is far outstrips the supply currently. So it's in our interest to scale up quickly, get further investment on board, get the infrastructure in place to support companies such as Delivery Mates. And we can do it. You have confidence in the product. Yes, of course, there's always more confidence to be instilled in you for its use. And again, as we go back to the point about funding, the funders will become more confident of the product the more they see it in use with companies like Amazon, for goodness sakes. You know, what bigger statement, endorsement is going to be Amazon, you know, one of the largest logistics companies out there. So watch that space.
I think it's a really interesting point, and I'm trying not to lose sight. We've got, you know, many believers around the table today, but in terms of getting adoption, Richard, this is going to be the one that we need to get scale and adoption. I'm thinking somebody else sitting outside of this room, maybe a different funder, different insurer, somebody other than EAV. How are they tackling this, do you think?
Well, I mean, if you're talking from the funding, it seems to be we don't really seem to have any competitors because nobody's prepared to take the time to look at the bespoke packages and understand that the industry starts small, that you've got a new industry, it starts small. It's been very difficult. We have funders that will fund for us, but if somebody rang in to fund an electric product in this marketplace, they wouldn't do it. They'll do it for us, but they won't do it for anybody else because they want the confidence. They don't know where it's come from. I mean, I think the electric delivery market has suffered a lot from the cheap Chinese scooter imports have done a lot of damage because a lot of funders did fund those in the first place, and then they had a lot of problems. People refused to pay because they couldn't get any parts, you know. And we had various, even commercial people who tried to buy them. And what used to happen was they used to buy a container load, and then they used to get thrown 10 in to cover the parts in case they needed any parts, which, you know, from an insurance company point of view, which really comes back to us, because if they won't insure it, we can't finance it. Yeah. So there's the two. But the whole thing became a mess because they weren't set up. They don't have workshops to dismantle scooters and have somewhere to store them and then put the bits on the other ones, and the whole thing sort of fell apart. So quite a few in the early days had their fingers quite badly burnt, and I think that didn't help. And of course that has rubbed off onto the bicycle sector and the cargo bike sector, because it's made it a lot harder to get it started, because somewhere somebody has got this on the computer saying we funded some electric, turned out to be a nightmare, the insurance company wouldn't do them, you know, they had no value second hand, anything electric, big red cross through. So that there are some funders still very much
in that way,
in that bracket, a lot of funders in that bracket, I would say. So we're lucky. We've got about 18 funders that we use. So we've got a good few. You know, some will do 2-wheeled electric bicycles and not 3-wheeled electric bicycles, which is, you know, we just have to go to the one that does the best job for the client we've got.
Okay. What about the insurance market?
I was going to say, I think maybe in the past insurance has been viewed as, or getting insurance has been viewed as a sort of hurdle you have to jump over in order to finance the bike, in order to do whatever sort of necessary evil. I've focused today quite a bit on our sort of mobility market specialisation, but what LACA is about insurance business model innovation, so that we as your insurer on your side by the nature of our business model, we want to settle claims for you. That's where we make our money. So I think maybe we can change the view of insurance as a necessity, a must-have, and a kind of, as you're going through the list of what must I do in order to take on this bike, insurance, who's going to deal with that, to something where you go, actually this is a really valuable part of the service. I know that if my bike goes out of action, if I'm insured with LACA, I know I've got my loss of income covered, I know I've got the bike replaced as new, I'm dealing with someone who's a specialist in that area, the bike's replaced quickly, you know, like an actual valuable part of the whole ecosystem, not a necessity.
Again, I'm going to say to further reinforce, I mean, again, we need to understand where Eve has come from as a company with its product. You know, around the whole cargo bike industry, you know, there's people out there all trying to do the same thing, trying to exploit a marketplace that they know is there, but we know it's an education. Now, from Eve's perspective, it starts off as a family business. And you know, and with all the right reasons, all the right ingredients there, we've now moved from, with investment, we've moved out to being a small SME. We're 3 years now to us being a startup. I'd like to essentially get rid of the startup name, but we still are considered to be a startup by the funders. We have to demonstrate to them, we're loss-making currently, no harm in that because of all the money that we've invested and consumed within our R&D, getting the product out to market. This year we should be in a position where we'll break even, and actually we should make a profit based on the current targets that we have. Now that automatically changes the dynamic on the company. The balance sheet becomes a positive net worth for people out there. The funders can see that. That should lend confidence to us as a company. It should lend confidence to the product. Then they have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, okay, well, one, the market's growing, great roster of clients, tick, tick, tick. Yes, there's some tier 2 on there, but everybody has to start somewhere, as we did. Then they have to get their own internals to get some confidence in the product itself. Now that is happening. Again, I can cite back to maybe March or April last year. I was approached by a very large Dutch bank. They had an innovation or accelerator fund for funding this sector. 6 months we were in that perpetual cycle of proving, showing them, etc., and we literally had nothing from them. It just stopped. We followed it up. I'm sorry, no, we haven't got the appetite. Now we've got people approaching us. So at least that sort of perception has changed. It's how well we now promote the story to people. Again, us as a company, to the product, and through the client base and the sector itself.
Yeah.
And unless they know of something we don't, forget the fuel that's actually supporting this, the energy, the power, it's EV or hydrogen. This sector's not going to go away. It is only going to grow. So they need to jump on. EV is also looking now at hydrogen as a fuel. So we'll be the first cargo bike company to have a hydrogen-based product out there within the next 2 months, and for one of the big city councils. So, as I say, we're not going away. It's a degree of success, not failure now for us. So we need to find the funders to support us, and if we don't, then we'll go down the private route. And at the moment we were using our own money, we will find private funds to support us.
It's a really interesting piece, isn't it, in a developing market, finding funding to do this, because I think everybody takes that risk, whether it's Peter from your side and from an insurance side, or from, particularly in a manufacturing and research and development, costs are pretty big to get into this. Do you think you're over that now? Do you think you're over the research development phase, and you really think yourself as a manufacturing company now?
We're certainly a small-scale manufacturer. I think if we look at our strategy as one R&D, we're definitely an R&D house. We are. Nigel referred to it as our skunk works. That seems to be sort of our nom de guerre that we're using with various parties. As a manufacturer, we're still very, very small scale. Can we get to that 100 a month? Yes. We have a very good support structure to do that. We have the resources to do it, financial and people now. So I think certainly the ingredients are there for us as a company. But we also have to look at ourselves as our strategy. Are we going to become a large-scale manufacturer, or are we going to potentially outsource or license out? If we have to look after, and we do wish to exploit markets elsewhere, and let's just say rest of the world, so anything outside of the UK, because even Europe is hard work, just logistically. We will have to identify partners to work with, whether it's distribution, service, maintenance. If we were to do that ourselves, we can do it. Yes, it's part of our strategy play if all else fails. But there's a huge cost associated with that and a huge timeline. So, we're currently weighing up. We're just about to look at the strategy over the next 18 months again and just go back to basics and build back through. We're looking at, okay, what are those planks to our business? So we're preparing for both. But ultimately, it would make a lot of sense for us to plug in, forgive the analogy, but to plug into a large-scale OEM that does have that infrastructure in place geographically and has the footprint, more importantly. Because can we support from the UK and from Oxford? If a bike goes down in Dubai, for instance, where we've just started selling product with our customers, can we support it? Well, I'd have to find a local resource, or we work with a geographical player. So we're very open to our strategy.
I think the other thing I'd like to say, Kevin, is also the other thing we've done is stuff. We've had a couple of clients who have ordered bikes from a manufacturer, and basically it's a small manufacturer, so basically they can't wait till it's built to get paid. And in those situations we have actually managed to agree a 50% payment in advance, so therefore the manufacturer has the funding to build the bike, and then they get paid the 50% on delivery. So we have managed to score some very good first and actually help the market as its whole go forwards, because there are ways of doing that. I mean, if Richard had a client, he talks about a waste removal and they specifically want to order some built specially just for that client, then obviously we could do the same. They could have the 50%, because obviously he wants guaranteed they're going to have the vehicle at the end. And if they pay 50%, they're going to have the vehicle, aren't they? So,
and typically that's a model that we will employ with customers.
Yeah, so I think, we have managed to do that. So, it's just been, we have a good reputation. We know the funders, they know the market we're in, they know it's different now. And we've been able to drive forwards, But like I said, we've been in it 12 years, or 10 years. So we were, we worked with delivery mates before it was delivery mates.
Yeah.
So, we've been working with them a long time,
And what about the real cost of insurance in this market, which is something that varies from £5 a month to £3,000 a year, depending where you go to? Monetary speaking, where are you going with your product?
Well, with LACA, you only pay based on the cost of claims that have happened within the group of customers that we pool you with.
Yeah.
It's not to say if you make £1 worth of claims in a month, you pay £1.
But are you able to say how much a fleet of 10 bikes would cost?
We recognise economies of scale based on volume and value of bikes, and our pricing, the way we think about pricing is where we set the maximum price that a customer would pay. So whilst we split the cost of claims across customers each month, of course that varies month to month. In theory, if there were no claims in a month, our customers would pay nothing, we'd make no money. But then on the high side, we set a maximum price per month for our customers, so no matter what happens, you'll never pay more than X. So when we talk about pricing, we talk about that maximum price. And for fleets of bikes, we set that at anything between, it depends on territory, 3 to 9% a year, depending on volume and value of bikes. And then you as the customer with that cap price will pay your share of the cost of claims from within the risk pool that you're in.
Did that answer the question?
Not really, I didn't
No, I don't think so.
But it depends on the fleet size and value. But I think in terms of a maximum price, you can think of something between 3 and 9% annually.
Okay.
Yeah, because we've also done with one client we've done with the leasing is where, in effect, they wanted to bring an individual incentive in for their riders. And basically, if their riders performed everything in the right way or whatever, then we would arrange through the finance that they would then get a discount on their bikes. So they would get so many rentals back in the year to incentivise them to look after it. So their staff are physically looking after the bikes to the best of their, because obviously it lowers the costs all around. So we've done that before. So we have quite a few bespoke things that will work on a small basis, because we accept that nobody has 300 bikes they want to do a deal on day one. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's got 300 bikes waiting to be sold now.
No. Certainly watch that space. I mean, Eve currently is tendering on some very large projects, and 300 wouldn't be beyond the norm if things work out for us this year. And one way of incentivising your customers is give them a £5 Amazon voucher. Yeah, there's one.
Yeah, we always £5. Just generally outside of the companies we're here now, so we talked a lot about Eve and its marketplace. Clearly one of the other big players is Rital, but who else do you see having the same strategy as you guys have got?
Okay, that's a very difficult question. I mean, one thing we have been doing over this last month, actually looking at our competitor landscape. Now, again, as I said before, I think from a customer's perspective, first and foremost, if you look at their needs and wants, they may have a 2-wheel demand, possibly 3. Our thinking on 3-wheel bikes, and then 4. If we look at the 4-wheel landscape, there's probably 2 or 3 players out there that we'd consider to be competitors. I mean, rather than naming the names per se.
Yeah, okay.
But, it's a healthy landscape out there for us to actually look at and have a competitor. At the end of the day, it keeps us on our toes as a company. Equally, they may have made some advancements. They may have a different product out there which actually helps us. Again, some of them they're close to their customers. I was listening to a gentleman earlier, one of our competitors outside, and they're working with the German market. That's an area that we're opening up this year. And, we have the funding and financing available over there right now through a partner. Now, because they're so close to them geographically, one, that helps. I mean, again, sort of having a resource on the ground, which we are planning to do. 2, again, they're doing the same thing we're doing. They are listening to their customers. And that's what we have to do. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So, you know, the Eve is very flexible. It does have its limitations, but we'll always listen to the customer and try to adapt to their marketplace. You know, we have a good customer, we can mention them, Laundry Heap, the sort of the Airbnb of the laundry market. We've had to adapt the box to fit their needs. It's not been a particularly difficult fix, but we've done it. That just demonstrates to them that we believe in them and also our own product. So the competitors, again, they're not going away. You know, some may fall by the wayside. You know, it does require investment like we've done. Then it's a case of then exploiting that marketplace. I think from our perspective, one thing we've identified are these silos, as we're calling, logistics market being obviously the obvious one. It's working hand in hand with people like delivery mates, understanding what they want, what they need, and then adapting that product for them. And that's important. We have to, I mean, I think you mentioned earlier about listening to people. We have to be able to listen. We can't be arrogant about our position in the marketplace. So certainly with the team that Eve's built thus far, you know, we're trying to be far more proactive now with that marketplace. And it's something we want to do. You know, we want to be a success at the end of the day. I
think we all want to be a success around the table, really. So I suppose the question I'd like us to think about and just answer from an industry point of view to finish with is, I said, I think earlier, I've got a million vans out there delivering product today. If we wanted cargo bikes to be 10% of that marketplace, so 100,000 in the UK, how does this industry get to 100,000? How long do you think that's going to take? I'll come to you last, Richard. Peter, what do you think? 100,000 cargo bikes taking 10% of the delivery market. How long?
I mean, I think from experience, I think it comes back to having an affordable, complete package. I think a complete package, including the bike, the leasing, the insurance. So basically, you've got a simple monthly payment. That's what clients seem to want, including the maintenance, everything. A bit like contract hire in vans, I suppose. You've only got to look at how companies finance vans. Contract hire is very good. And basically on the same basis. I think if the price can be done sensibly and the drivers can be shown, then it's down to the manufacturers to make them in this country. I mean, obviously, if they're selling 70,000 a year plus in Germany, I would have said 5 years, then we should be selling 70, 100,000 here.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily in the best position to
but you've got to insure 100,000.
So we're, as I said, a facilitator of this industry in a way, and I think our role in that is reducing friction to adoption. Insurance is a part of that, finance is a part of that, of course. Legislation's a part of that. Our customers who use these types of vehicles are growing extremely fast. They're raising money rapidly themselves, they're growing their fleets rapidly themselves. So I won't stick my head out and put a sort of time frame on it, but yeah, we see our customers growing extremely quickly and adopting these bikes extremely quickly, converting from different types of vehicles or growing brand new businesses whose whole business model is around the use of these vehicles. Think about quick commerce and the likes.
Okay, so from Eve's perspective, and very selfishly, I mean, our plan over the next 5 years, again, which we're revisiting anyway, based on the current levels of demand and the clients we're talking to, and new ones we've identified, that 100,000 units, we believe is actually capable of being achieved within 3 to 4 years. Now, a lot of that will come through education. The other side is about regulations. You know, we're only going to see again more adoption of ULEZ and sort of emission-free zones. Obviously, our product, along with a few others out there, do fit those requirements. And also within Eve's stable, so we mentioned about the stable of its sort of modular platform, there will be further iterations. So it's not just about the Eve 2 Cubed, it's about the Eve Me, it's about the Eve Ro-Ro, it's about the Eve Links. You know, we will have both last and mid-mile products out there in a very short space of time. So I think the 100,000 is very achievable. A lot of it will come down to regulations, central government's rules, and it will. But what we're seeing now is also the early stages of that. I mean, again, if you look at the way we're working with you yourselves are promoting it as well. You know, you're one of the first adopters, probably the first adopter out there for logistics, alongside another competitor of Amazon's. But you know, equally so, you're pushing very hard for that education, and it does come down to education. I think cost sometimes has to be pushed out, and they have to look at actually the economic value or impact upon the environment. And that's for a 55-year-old bloke to say that. It's quite hard. given I'm a diesel driver. So, you know, what we do want to see is that our colleagues, sponsors, companies that we work with, we create a forum, we push this hard, we talk to transport, we talk to central government, and we get these methods and policies put in place to adopt and sponsor cargo bikes and EV. That's what we want to see.
Excellent. I mean, just to pick up on the point on government, what more can the industry do to convince government they need to change? And what would you want them to change?
Right, well, you've put me on the spot there, and dear old Nigel's not here, so I don't have quite his
I think there needs
expertise.
to be an MCIA, doesn't there?
Probably.
That's what there needs to be. Needs
I mean,
to
yeah,
be
we would like to see
a lobbying
forum, a group formed,
a
which
lobbying
he wants to be
group.
part of this,
Yeah.
to canvass and support this industry. And Nigel's probably the biggest proponent of that, certainly in our company. So he has a meeting next week with central government, this week, apologies. And as I say, we will be, or want to spearhead that. Now with it, if it includes a consolidation or cooperation with other cargo manufacturers, great. But we want to be at that table. We want to work with both clients as well and get clients on board, also co-promoting, insurance companies. I mean, everybody around this table, yes, we're all sponsoring this particular sector, but it's not going to hurt it. And we all have to support it. So, you know, it's our livelihoods depend on it. We've got people, you know, back at our factory are building these bikes. You know, we've sold the story, sold the sizzle, but that sizzle is actually, it is working with people.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're probably getting towards the end of the time. And just to close off for me, I think 100,000 in 3 years is probably too long. That's what we should take away from my point of view. Let me tell you why I think it's too long. I think if we don't change the narrative and we don't have capacity to look what happened with the market when COVID came along. People are sat at home now ordering products as we speak. Tens of thousands of products have been ordered, if not hundreds of thousands, while we've been on this webinar. Yeah. So
No,
I think we need to find those groups. I need to get the commercial models right, and we need to be able to compete against the EVs, because otherwise the EVs will take, precedent. Now, I think congestion, which is the point Nigel made, is as much of an environmental problem as it is the emissions. You only have to go in our cities. You know, average speeds in London are 4 miles an hour. It's just you can almost walk
as high
faster.
as that, I think.
Yeah. Some days,
spent an hour outside Marylebone Station last week.
Some days. So I think the challenge for the industry, and we take our part in that, is how do we get to that number in a really quick way? The challenge today. I've heard lots of things, and it's been enlightening. I think we will follow up. By the way, we will follow up.
I think I'm sure Lawrence would agree with this that probably from an insurance point of view, there probably is the appetite now to do 100,000 a year.
Absolutely.
Right? From a funding point of view, we have enough funders to be able to supply the money to do 100,000 a year. Right? So, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I'd have said, "Oh, well, hold on a moment here," right?
Yeah.
So the funders are there, so we have the money. So it comes really to the manufacturers and the salespeople.
Manufacturers and the end user.
Well, the client.
Yeah,
Then
the
users.
client. Yeah, the
Then
salespeople finding the end client and giving the end clients the confidence
That this is a sustainable plan.
they need to stick their foot in the water.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing. I think the government. Yes, the government can do a bit, but I think that'll come. But I think the number of people we speak to. I mean, one of our biggest funders who have really embraced this, they do about 100 million pounds worth of cars a year. So they get massive. Well, it's probably a bit harder at the moment because we can't seem to get anything. But apart from that, they have tremendous connections. We've already got them to put the EAV on their LinkedIn posts that go out to about 30,000 people or whatever they go out to. So they've already done that. They're quite excited that they funded some EAVs. So, we are prepared to work with the manufacturers that work with us, that we support. We're prepared to work with it and put as much forward as possible.
Yes.
So we'll try and, we'll try and sell the message as much as we possibly can, because it helps everybody, because it will bring the rates down, and that's what we want, you see.
We all want that economies of scale. I think
It's just
on
bring
that,
the rates down overall. So,
on that, I think we all want the economies of
Yeah.
scale, and we put it out there. I think really we're probably drawing to a close now.
Yeah.
We spent out 100 minutes or probably a few more. Thank you very much, Peter.
Not all
Lawrence.
pleasure.
Thank you.
And thanks to Nigel. Nigel, let's run off, and we'll be doing some more of this quite shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, boys.